Welcome. My name is John Scruton. I'm the town manager for Plaistow, and I'm here with members of the Conservation Commission and Jennifer Polomotto, who is the Source Water Protection Specialist with the Northeast Rural Water Association. To my far left is Jill Center, and then there is Larry Gill. Sitting beside me on my right is Jennifer Polomotto, and then Tim Moore, who is the chairman of the Conservation Commission and also chairman of the Planning Board. Tim, can you tell us what source water is and why it's important to protect it?
Well, source water comes from several sources. On the surface, we have lakes, reservoirs, rivers, and streams, and so forth. And there's also underground sources which come from glacial activity from the Ice Age. And those include areas we refer to as stratified drift and till. And then finally there's bedrock, which is deep underground, and in the bedrock there's cracks or fissures which contain source water. Now it's important to protect because that same water supplies the water that we also drink. And if we have contaminated water that we drink, it can lead to serious health problems.
Okay, there's a map beside you there, and there's some blue on that map. What exactly is that outlining? Within the first one, the boundaries of Plaistow are the dark blue lines that run around there. Maybe you can tell us something. You've talked about where Plaistow gets its water. Could you tell us more about what is on that map?
Well, this map shows an aquifer, which are the, from Plaistow, the stratified drift areas that we mentioned. And these are the areas that have potential to provide us with the most water. So this light blue area that overlays the boundaries is the aquifer in Plaistow. The red line that you may see going through the map is the railroad line. So 125 would come up approximately like this. And of course Main Street comes out and runs up in this area.
Okay. Larry, how do aquifers get contaminated, and why are aquifers so important for Plaistow as a source of water?
Well, in the case of Plaistow, it really is the town's only source of water, and the individuals that live in the town's only source of water. An aquifer you can think of as a formation that is water-bearing. You can almost think of it as a sponge where the water is contained underground. When people have heard the term a water table, that is right at the surface of the aquifer. And as Tim pointed out on the map, that area that's highlighted in blue is the area that is defined as the aquifer and has the greatest potential for supplying water. The other white areas are till. They can also provide water, but to a lesser extent. The issue and concern about the aquifer is that if people don't mismanage their waste, such as septic systems, leaking underground storage tanks, gasoline, pour gasoline or oil out in the backyard to get rid of it because that's what the easiest thing to do, that can present a source of contamination to the groundwater, which is our water supply.
Now, most people in Plaistow have their own wells, and they have to understand that that water then comes out of this aquifer or out of the bedrock below, which Tim referred to, which again gets its water from the aquifer eventually, from the fissures and from other ground sources. Jill, why should they be concerned about the aquifers?
Well, the reason they need to be concerned is because the aquifer feeds everyone's well, and if you cause to pollute your own well, you're also can be polluting your neighbor's well at the same time. If you pour something down into the ground, it will go into, it's a possibility to go into your well, but it also has a possibility of going into someone else's well at the same time. So we need to protect our aquifers so everybody's water is safe to drink.
I know one of the statements that was made at the Selectmen's meeting when you presented some of this information this week was that you wouldn't want to take a glass of drinking water and then start putting drops of oil in it, drops of gasoline, antifreeze, and other contaminants. And then if you're not willing to do that to the drinking water on the table, why would you put it down your drain? Because once it goes down the drain, it's going to be in the septic system, as Larry mentioned, end up in the water and pollute not only your well, but your neighbor's wells and other wells as well. Since water quality and quantity are important to all town residents, what is being done, Tim, to protect our water supplies?
Well, we've taken a number of steps over the last 10 or 15 years. Starting in the late 70s and early 80s, the town contracted with Fenton Keyes, a large engineering firm, and their study was to look at the potential for a municipal water system. So they did quite extensive mapping of quantities of water throughout the aquifer areas here. And they provided a report, and the conclusion from that report was that there was no single source that was going to provide Plaistow with water. And they recommended a number of alternatives or smaller pieces that in combination would supply the water. And one was to dam Kelly Brook. So part of the actions that the town took after the Fenton Keyes report was to purchase land in what's known as Frog Pond Woods to provide would be where the reservoir would be from a dam that would back up Kelly Brook. And also in the surrounding areas, we made a different type of zone called residential conservation, which requires 5-acre zoning. So that cut way back on the number of septic systems and potential contaminants that would be close to the reservoir. Also in the early 80s, and again in the late 80s, we instituted a wetlands ordinance which helps to protect surface water. And the surface water in the wetlands will help to clean some of the contaminants, but it also eventually soaks into the ground and gets into the aquifers. So it's important to protect surface waters to keep the underground water clean as well. Then just in 1999, we passed an aquifer protection ordinance, which placed some more stringent controls on building activity if you were directly above the aquifer. Part of another piece of the puzzle, in 2000, we applied for a grant from DES to do some stormwater management. We're working on that. Later in 2000, or 2001 rather, is when Jill made connection with the Northeast Rural Water Association, and we've spent the better part of 2001 working on the plan, a protection plan, and now we're in the implementation phase. So we're now starting to do some of the steps that are in that plan. And then finally, at the end of 2001, we applied for another DES grant, and that was to make a thorough review of all of our water protection ordinances. And that will take place sometime later this year after we've implemented some of the water supply protection plan points.
Tim, I appreciate all the work that you've done on the grants. There's a substantial amount of effort in terms of the local match, which the taxpayers will appreciate, is coming from the volunteers that are sitting here, that Tim, Larry, Jill, and others have done a lot of volunteer work on this. This process, the first grant, let's talk about the drainage grant first. This is going to fit in nicely with the EPA Phase 2 rules and other requirements coming from the federal government that affects water quality in the Merrimack. And Larry, would you comment on this some?
Sure. Back in the EPA has two programs. One is called Phase 1, which is for large systems that discharge wastewater. You consider industrial plants or municipal sewage treatment plants that discharge large volumes of waste to water supply to water. Phase 2 deals with smaller systems, which are and they're storm drainage systems. So large communities were taken care of in Phase 1. Phase 2 deals with the smaller communities such as Plaistow, and it really is confined to it's defined by the degree of urbanization. So not all of Plaistow is covered under this, but for all intents and purposes, most of Plaistow is. And really what it requires each community to do is to do 6 steps to address potentials for stormwater contamination. The first of which is a public and education outreach program. A second is to define the nature of your system. A third is to develop the materials that would be protective of it. And the requirements, I believe, are due for Plaistow in the year 2003, which is really not all that far away. In March, Plaistow will have to submit to New Hampshire its plan for dealing with stormwater contamination.
Yeah, in fact, I've gotten a call recently from DES who was asking where we're at in the process so that we will make sure that we meet those deadlines. Certainly to meet those deadlines, we depend upon the Conservation Commission, upon the grant that Tim's been working on. A lot of the steps that Larry has outlined are beginning to be realized by the Conservation Commission, the work they're doing. So preventing pollution is an important part. That's why you need to manage stormwater. That's why you need to be careful what goes into the ground, what goes into your septic systems, because that gets into the ground. One of the resources that we've relied upon is Jennifer, who has come to help us, and before her there was another member of the Northeast Rural Water Association that was working with us. They did a very complete and thorough plan that was presented to the Board of Selectmen by the Conservation Commission this week. And Jennifer, can you tell us a little about the Northeast Rural Water Association?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Northeast Rural Water Association is a nonprofit organization. We're an association of wastewater treatment and drinking water facilities, and we also have members that are vendors. And we have several different programs. We go around the states of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and we do source water protection planning. So this is how we got involved with the town of Plaistow. And we also offer services in terms of technical assistance with drinking water and also wastewater, and also training for operators.
Well, that's good. So what is a source water protection plan? Could you tell us about some of the details of what went into this plan?
Sure. A source water protection plan is a plan to make sure that you keep quality drinking water. And as you can see, one of the most important things of the plan is to have this map. This is the source water area. It's showing the aquifers, and it's showing this web of circles is showing the different sources of water that you have, the different public drinking water sources within Plaistow. So one component of the plan is first to delineate those areas in which those are the aquifer recharge areas for your wells.
So each of those circles represents a well.
Exactly.
And within that area is some property that is outside the area which is owned by the well. And now what were you saying about that area?
It's an area, those circles are representing areas in which you want to be very careful about what types of land use activities occur within those wells. You want to make sure that nothing will happen that might be a potential source of contamination. Obviously, depending upon the community, you may have more or less development occurring in that area.
Okay, now there are various size circles up there, and I assume they represent the number of users for each of the wells. In other words, the more intensely used an area is for the number of people, the larger the protection radius has to be.
Exactly. So if one of the larger circles, you're going to have a higher rate of withdrawal. So you'll need a larger recharge area.
Now, we call them public water supplies, but none of them are owned by the, well, I shouldn't say none of them. Hardly any of them are owned by the town of Plaistow. The town hall, the public safety building are each public water supplies, but what is the definition of a public water supply?
A public water supply is any water system with 15 connections or 25 users that is used for more than 60 days per year. So, for example, this could be a condo association, this could be single-family residential homes, trailer parks, and then we also have something called transient community water systems, and those are things like gas stations and restaurants, and we also have non-transient community water systems. Those are things like schools.
So what specifically is in the Plaistow Protection Plan to protect all of this water supply?
There are, I believe, 6 elements, and the first one is education and outreach. This is one of the most important areas to increase awareness about the importance of source water protection. This is an area that the committee has been working on right now, so that's the first one. Another element, another activity that they've identified that they would like to do is posting of source water protection areas so that people know where these areas are. And as you can see in Plaistow, it's pretty much the entire town. We also have an aquifer overlay that has also been expressed an interest in working on that. What else is there? If anyone else wants to jump in, there's a couple other areas that you all have identified.
Well, I think that one of the important things for people to see, if we could focus on the map here, is how many of those circles overlap. I think that that's a critical part of the presentation that we want to make to folks, is that each one of those radiuses represents the protective area around the well, and as was explained, the size of the radius means the amount of water that is withdrawn. Now, if you look at all of those circles, they are certainly considerably overlapped, and that represents a significant potential problem for the town of Plaistow. What may not show up quite as well in there are some dots that represent potential sources of contamination, which would be such things as gas stations, dry cleaners, any entity, any business or home or that might contain significant quantities of potential contaminants, such as oil, such as gasoline, such as chemicals. And so in the town of Plaistow, the problem that we potentially face here is the interaction of all of those potential sources of contamination, which happen to run pretty much right along Route 125, and the complexity of those circles. So when water is coming out from, say, the Walmarts in that area, that concentric well system is impacting lots of other wells that are in that area. And so the potential for contamination from one source of contamination can be spread across very many, as we know has happened at the Beatty waste oil site. So.
Yeah, and there was a gas station there on
Correct.
125 that leaked, and that has caused some contamination. The state is constantly monitoring that, providing small treatment plants for each individual house. But town-wide, the best thing you can do is to prevent it from occurring in the first place. You mentioned some of the sources of contamination. Anyone want to add anything more to mentioning sources of contamination?
No, I think Larry covered them pretty well. We're obviously concerned where the majority of wells are located, but we all have to remember, each of us, although most of us all have our own wells, as Larry or Jill mentioned earlier, if you accidentally spill gasoline or something from your lawnmower, that has a possibility of contaminating not only your well, but also your neighbors. So it's very important to be aware of what the sources of contamination are, and how to prevent spills, and best management practices that you can take to keep that stuff out of the water.
I remember reading that 1 gallon of gasoline would pollute 1 million gallons of water. And I don't know, but it may be higher now with MBTE, because MBTE is very soluble, will quickly spread through even broader area. But that's an amazing figure to think. If somebody's out filling their lawnmower and they're a little sloppy and they fill a pint of gasoline, then they're polluting hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. So I think it's very important that homeowners be aware with the household products that they have. We have a hazardous household waste collection day for products. There are ways in which you can dispose of used motor oil safely, in which you can dispose of products safely. Putting them in a drain, a catch basin, or on the ground is not the way to do it. I mean, that clearly is destroying one of the most valuable resources we have, which is our underground water supply. How does the plan address the concerns that we've just been talking about here?
One thing that the committee decided that they would like to do, after going through an inventory of potential sources of contamination and ranking those threats, they decided that they would like to do a best management practices survey. So what that involves is a voluntary survey going to businesses that might generate toxic waste and making sure that they are handled in an appropriate way so that they won't get into the groundwater.
Any other things that the plan addresses that someone wants to add?
Well, I mean, we've mentioned awareness, and we're going to, I think Jill has worked quite hard on a brochure, and Marilyn Sender has prepared a letter to the businesses making them aware of this activity. And so those two will go a long ways to make people aware of the issue, and particularly the businesses, I think we want to follow up with. We know what chemicals most of them have, and we'd like to follow up with how the best management practice to handle those chemicals safely, and in case there is an accident or a spill, what they should do about it.
I think one of the other things that ties into this is the Phase 2 issue that we were talking about before. Basically, that's where the town is going to identify its storm drainage system. And while we're doing that, we're also going to be looking to see whether or not we see any obvious signs of pollution in those drains. We will sample those, and then we'll follow up and try to learn if there is any sources of contamination in some of those pipes. So the town, I think what the Conservation Commission is trying to do is trying to tackle this source of potential sources of contamination from a number of different ways, and also to try to educate townspeople as best we can about how important this water supply is. We went through better part of 7 months here with the threat of a drought. That seems to be somewhat relieved now. But then you have the other side of the coin, which is how do you handle all of the excess water from parking lots and et cetera that has potential for contamination and will eventually get into the ground. So we're looking for ways in terms of those best management practices to limit the amounts of contamination that be coming off of parking lots and trying to get as much water back into the ground, clean water as we can back into the ground.
Larry, you mentioned earlier that Phase 2 of the EPA, which we're going to have to comply with, emphasizes education. We've been talking about this. This show is actually part of our education effort. Jill, can you talk about that brochure that you showed the Board of Selectmen Monday night?
Well, we developed a brochure that explains what is groundwater, it lists a few points on how to protect your groundwater. It defines what an aquifer is. It explains a little bit on ways to protect the water, and it gives some general information to the homeowner. And hopefully by the end of May, these brochures will be available either at the library or at the town hall.
And I think you talked about plans to get them into the school, too.
Right. We're hoping that to send them home in the Pollard Expresses at the elementary school.
And wasn't there some effort to contact teachers or environmental teachers in the school system?
Yes. Yes, right now we have a scheduled appointment to meet with the curriculum supervisors, not only for the Timberlane Regional School, but also at the Pollard Elementary School, to talk to them about one, what they think would work well in terms of getting information from us to the kids and also to the families. We think the brochure is probably one, but we also want to talk about them about some other educational opportunities that we could explore later on in the next few years about, again, educating them about the environment, about water protection, and how important that our groundwater supplies are.
And has the response been positive so far as you try to educate and get the information out?
It's been excellent. We talked to Kristen Pereira and Bill Mealy. Bill Mealy is the supervisor of Timberlane Regional School's curriculum, and we think we have some, we can come up with some. We're also working with a woman from New Hampshire DES. They'll be meeting with us to explore some of these educational opportunities that we think are out there that should work very well for us and for the schools.
Now, we're pleased to have Jennifer with us. Obviously, the Northeast Rural Water Association has been an important resource. Are there other resources that have been helping you as you try to get the information out about the importance of protecting water or preventing pollution into water?
Yes, I think Jill has worked with Paul Seska from New Hampshire DES. The woman that will be meeting with us next week is Nicole Clegg. And I think we can draw from a whole bunch of different sources. I mean, the state of Massachusetts has some fairly active environmental programs, as does New Hampshire. And I think we need to find those products and tools that work best for the town of Plaistow and employ them as best we can.
And I know, for example, our health officer is working with a health officer in Haverhill, and we're trying to develop better relations through the planning departments. We go down there about once a month to meet with their planning department as part of our emphasis upon the fact that this water doesn't stop at the border, or the problem doesn't stop at the border. It's an issue that we all need to address. We need to make sure that we protect the water and that we value what's underground. One of the ways you protect water, of course, is through zoning, and you've already alluded to that, Tim. The selectmen Monday night accepted a $15,000 grant that you had applied for. Right. I know that local labor is providing the match for that grant. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, part of the plan, source protection plan, was we mentioned ordinances, but we have a number of them in place, as I mentioned earlier. But what we would like to do and have the purpose of this grant was to really review the ordinances and tailor them to any unique needs or situations that are in Plaistow. Normally, when you first implement an ordinance, it's really based on some general template, which has all the right points, but it's often not tailored to Plaistow itself. So that review will be fairly technical review, and we hope to really fine-tune the ordinances to protect Plaistow's source water.
Are you waiting toward the end of the plan to implement the regulation review, or how is its sequencing going to be? Yeah,
decision I think was made pretty much to wait until the end of the plan for a couple reasons. One is we knew that the education and outreach was going to be, maybe of all things, the most important. It was something that we could get started with right away. And then, of course, we didn't know about the grant at the time that we started to put together the plan. So it seemed like a logical sequence to let's get started right away, get the outreach information out there, get the schools involved, and then we can come back, and once everyone is aware of the best management practices, then we can fine-tune our ordinances.
Okay. Now, what kind of, there have been a number of people that have helped on this process who weren't able to be here. We only have a certain number of chairs that we can fit on the stage here comfortably. Who are some of the others who have worked to help in the local community? A big
group of people, which we have so far not mentioned, is the Water Supply Protection Committee, I guess. I'm not sure what we exactly are calling ourselves. But this group of people included not only members of the Conservation Commission and Jennifer and her predecessor, but also owners of some of these public water supplies that Jennifer mentioned. So we had the committees made up of representatives from some of the condo associations or the homeowner associations that have these shared public wells. And also Pete Taylor from the Timberlane School District is on that committee. So that group of people, along with the Northeast Rural Water, really worked together on the plan. And so I'm sure I've forgotten people that are on that committee, but we do have their list, a list of their names. And everyone really made good contributions to getting that.
John, if I could add one thing. One thing that's really fantastic about the efforts of this committee is not only is it doing an awful lot for Plaistow, but it's also being recognized nationally by the EPA. This is obviously a volunteer group, and they've spent an awful lot of time working hard. They've come up with a good plan, and the Environmental Protection Agency is really pleased with their plan. It's one of the models of the country. Jill has been invited to go and present at a national conference, and it's something that Plaistow should be really proud of, and the folks here should be pleased with the work that they've done. They're really riding the crest of a wave of a lot of hard work.
Yeah, I actually maintain the website Plaistow.com for the town of Plaistow, and I did put a link to that EPA site. And if I may quote from Joan Harrigan Farrelly, Chief of the Prevention Branch of the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, quote, "The Plaistow, New Hampshire area-wide source water protection plan provides a strong basis for protection of the community's drinking water supplies. It is firmly built on the results of the town's thorough source water assessments. Robust assessments are the necessary building supplies for robust protection plans. I believe the best management practices and other prevention measures identified in the plan will serve as a useful model for other area-wide planning efforts in the region and elsewhere." So I'm certainly pleased with the efforts of the group that are here. I know a couple of the selectmen have been involved in this, as you mentioned, Pete Taylor, some of the condo associations that have water supplies, and others as well. I know we're missing some of the names that we should be pointing out, but certainly they've done a great job, and they're to be commended. And I'm glad you mentioned that EPA recognition that they have received. DES also recognized them. I think it was the Source, which is a DES publication. Had the Plaistow featured in the newsletter. It was a 4-page newsletter, and Plaistow got one of the 4 pages, which I thought was significant, since this is a statewide publishing effort. And that link is also on the Plaistow.com site. We're near the end of our time here, but before we close out, any last comments on that you would like to emphasize to the public on the source water protection plan or the program that we have in place?
Well, I'd like to invite any community members or business owners or anyone that's connected with any of these public wells to feel free to join the Water Committee. The more help, the better, and the more input, the better, because more minds are better than just one. So we're always looking for fresh ideas and more help. And we also have openings on conservation, so we're always looking for help on any of these areas. So to the public, I'd like to say if you could join in, we'd be more than willing to help you.
I think that's an excellent point. Government alone cannot protect the town. It takes the efforts of all citizens being vigilant and constantly working to make this happen. Other comments? Larry?
I'd like to reiterate what Jill had to say here. One of the things that's interesting, I worked with the state of Massachusetts environmental programs for a number of years, and lived in New Hampshire and Plaistow for 25. So it's an interesting comparison to see how Massachusetts approaches things and New Hampshire approaches things. And one of the things I like about the New Hampshire approach, particularly in the way Plaistow is done, is we've been a very proactive group. We've taken on some of these projects, and Jill has done an exceptional job, as well as Tim, in terms of putting these things together. We like to think that we can be proactive in this. My feeling was that when I got first involved with the Beatty waste oil site, and to see how the town came together in addressing some of those issues, I was extremely proud of the way the town approached that. And I think, as you were mentioning, to have people involved is the key to addressing a lot of these problems. It's really what Plaistow can do for itself and take care of its own issues, and that's one of the things I like about New Hampshire.
Tim?
Yeah, I would just like to follow up to say that we've been talking about all these plans and ordinances and so forth, and these are all wonderful things that we all need to be doing. But the fact is that once we have these plans in place and the ordinances in place, it doesn't stop. It's a constant, it's more a way of life of treating the water with respect, making sure that you don't contaminate it, and continually vigilant to keep the water quantity high and the water quality high. So it's a lifetime commitment to do that. And we are here hopefully with these best management practices will make that easy for people to do.
Jennifer, I've always been pleased that you drive down. Is it in Vermont that you drive down from to come down here and help us out? And I know your predecessor did as well. It's a lot of effort that you put in. How do you feel about all the efforts that have been going on here at Plaistow?
It's been actually just a pleasure to work with everyone on the committee, and especially such a hard-working, successful group. It just makes the drive all the more worth it. So it's been a pleasure.
That's good to hear. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening. If you have any questions, be sure to contact members of the Conservation Commission. We are interested in protecting the water because that is certainly part of the future of Plaistow. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.